Welcome to week 5 of MPAI 600 here at Georgetown University's Applied Intelligence program. Just start off with a couple of announcements. Again, I've mentioned this multiple times, so this shouldn't be news to anybody. September 27th, groups 1, 2, and 3 will be giving their presentations starting at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I've had a few questions about people in different time zones and issues. I'll just say this: make sure there's at least obviously representatives from your group that are briefing at the presentation. If not everyone in the group can attend, because again, time zones or other issues, that's okay. But as long as obviously somebody can brief the presentation, and how you do it and who briefs and those types of issues is completely up to the group. I will also be doing peer reviews, and I'll be sending out those this week. I don't want people to... I just had in the past where we've had a couple of students not even participate in the group presentation. They tried to get contact, they wouldn't return emails, and I need to know that, because everyone gets the same grade, but if there's someone who's really not showing up in the group presentations, and I need to know about that, so I'll send those out this week. I'll also send out the Zoom link in this announcement as well, so you know where to log in. And then the paper is an individual effort. It is an individual effort. I can't say that enough. It is not a group effort, and that's due 30 September by 11:59 p.m. So those are the key dates coming up. And just to review week 4, great discussions. I know it's a lot, but I think this is going to set you up for for this paper coming up. So Iraq WMD, and again, there was failures across the board. Failures from collection to analysis to communicating to policymakers to politicization to policymakers making decisions that were not based on intel. So there was, again, failures in collection. I think the Curveball documentary or 60 Minutes piece that I sent out is a classic example where really bad human intelligence was used, and it circulated into the intelligence community and eventually to the policymakers. That is a key collection failure. There's also inability to cross-cue intelligence collection assets, and the 60 Minutes showed that, where you had human intelligence saying one thing, the imagery showed something else, and you couldn't put those two data points together to undermine Curveball's story. So again, failures in collection, failures in analysis, the aluminum tubes, a lot of you brought that up, where, again, it was a combination of groupthink, combination of analysts wanted to get their name, not in the press, but wanted to make a name for themselves, and just incompetence in understanding those aluminum tubes that allowed that bad information to bubble up to the top. That's a key analytical failure that was critical in the WMD or the Iraq WMD case study. Organizational failures, as I mentioned in the discussion section, intel flowed. Well, there's two issues. One, a great deal of the Central Intelligence Agency intelligence flowed through one man, George Tenet. And if he says there's WMD in Iraq, there's WMD in Iraq, despite what mid-level analysts would say, despite what the various caveats and all the programs say. And that's an organizational failure. If your key national security decisions are based on the perceptions and biases of one man. Secondly, and again, a lot of you brought this up, was the Iraq or the Alternative Department of Defense Intelligence Group that kind of shot intelligence up the chain of command that had no business getting pushed up the chain of command that fast. That's failure in organization. Again, when you set up multiple, your own intelligence shops. Policy interface. Over and over again, that's a key point. Was intelligence politicized? The Rachel Maddow documentary has a very, very specific argument on that. And yes, it was politicized, and I agree with most of it there. But again, the interface between the policymakers and the intelligence community was broken to allow politicization to occur. So these were kind of all the issues, cascading issues that led to the Iraq WMD failure. And for, again, your papers, don't give me, if you choose to focus on Iraq WMD, don't give me 15 reasons why the Iraq WMD failure happened. Choose 1, 2, 3, absolutely maximum, and focus down on those. I don't want a laundry list of all the things that went wrong. So please, please don't do that. So 9/11, was 9/11 an intelligence failure? There's a good theories out there, and I bring this up in the lecture, that no, it wasn't an intelligence failure. There's a lot of things that are bad that happen that aren't necessarily intelligence failures. They're just, we live in a complex world where bad things happen, particularly in democratic countries where you can't knock the door down on every lead you get. So was it an intelligence failure? If I had not seen the NSA documentary, I would say no, it was an intelligence failure. But that NSA documentary really opened my eyes. There were 2 known Al-Qaeda operatives in the United States communicating with a bin Laden safe house, and this was known by the National Security Agency. Massive intelligence failure, even in those pre-9/11 days. So that, in of itself, I think, crosses the threshold, which makes it an intelligence failure. One question I do ask, and this goes back to what I call euphemistically the Sharma school of intelligence failure. Let's say you're working as an intel analyst, and you brief that famous memo, Bin Laden determined to attack in the U.S., and the president comes back to you and says, okay, what do you want me to do? You just said Bin Laden determined to attack in the United States. What do I do? Do I bomb Afghanistan? Do I shut down our aviation procedures? Do I stop the government? What do I do? And my point with that is, again, that statement, such a broad intel analysis, Bush gets beat up a lot on this, but it is so broad that the policymakers can't do anything about it. There's no reasonable recommendations that they can alter. And that's one of the schools of thought of intel failure, that you have to tailor the intelligence so it could be so reasonable risk reduction measures can be implemented. And one thing I ask again in your paper is you have to, you could say a lot of reasons why 9/11 was a failure. Big strategic issues, organizational issues, policymakers didn't want to listen, didn't understand the Sunni anger and Al-Qaeda anger, and those are all fine, and those are all reasons for 9/11. However, you have to get me down to, okay, risk reduction measures to stop 9/11. So you have to draw the strategic intel and bring it down to better flight or better civil aviation procedures that would have stopped 9/11. You got to draw that down. Otherwise, anyone can just say, oh, we failed in retrospect, or we failed to see this, we failed to see that. Yeah, that's all fine, but otherwise you're Monday morning quarterbacking. You have to draw the line to the exact procedures that would have stopped a 9/11-like attack. Organizational issues in the 9/11 case study. NSA documentary highlighted them again. Information was known by one part of our government, but it was not disseminated to the action arms of our government. The NSA analysts that had those transcripts didn't share it with the Central Intelligence Agency, didn't share it with the FBI, didn't share it with the San Diego field office of the FBI or local law enforcement in San Diego for various reasons, classification, pig-headed analysts or leadership at the NSA. So again, that's an organizational issue where one guy has information, but it's not, because of organizational priorities and incentives, it's not brought to other points that could actually do something. And then I ask, I draw this out, where along the chain could federal and state government have prevented 9/11? If those organizational issues were solved, if those intel flowed consistently throughout the entire organization, where would we have stopped it? And that's just something for you to to ponder going forwed. So paper 2. Again, strategic paper. I'll allow you can choose a case study. And we have plenty of case studies out there, from the Confessions to 9/11, Yom Kippur War. So you can choose one case study and go in depth, or you can choose an intelligence issue and show how it impacted 3 or 4 of those case studies. For example, if you want to choose mirror imaging, or if you want to choose mirror imaging, you can tell me how mirror imaging contributed to the Confessions, the intelligence failure there, and then the Yom Kippur War, and then Iraq WMD. So I'll allow you to do that. If you want to go in depth on one case study, that's fine. If you want to go in depth on one issue, whether it's analytical bias, collection failures, organizational issues, and talk about how that issue weaved through 3 or 4 case studies, you're more than welcome to do that as well. And just to give you, again, review some of the issues that I've laid out. Don't give me all of these. These are just some of the high points that you can go in depth. Failures in collection, Pearl Harbor, the aircraft carriers. Many of you brought that up in your discussion boards, that the United States did not know the location of the Japanese critical asset. The Yom Kippur War, over-reliance on one human source. That contributed arguably to cascading effects in the intel cycle. The Iraq War and the human that I just talked about, the curveball issue, again, failure in collection. Failures in analysis, and again, the Pearl Harbor case study I mentioned, that the inability to put together the pieces of information from the diplomatic codes to knowing that the Japanese were surveilling key assets on Pearl Harbor. Those are failures in analysis. The Confessions, mirror imaging, or confirmation bias by not just, again, the prosecutors, but by the whole system contributed to that. Iraq WMD, again, groupthink. You talk about it in the aluminum tubes. You can talk about it in other other failures to analyze the WMD correctly. These are all grouped into kind of failures in analysis. Politicization, Iraq WMD, as I mentioned and is outlined in the Rachel Maddow documentary. The Confessions, and again, you can arguably that Detective Ford was put under so much pressure that he came up with solutions that were pretty ridiculous. And then 9/11, as I just mentioned, the inability to discuss policy, or inability to tailor the intelligence so it allowed policymakers to make decisions. Again, those are issues that you can go in further depth. And then organization, the 9/11 documentary, as I mentioned, that showed the NSA not communicating with other organizations. Pearl Harbor, there was information collected, and the Dahl goes into this in depth at the federal level, but it was not shared with the commanders on the ground. Whether that would have made a difference is up to you to prove in your papers. And then the fusion centers, one of the goals of the fusion centers is to push those issues of watch listing and signals intelligence intercepts and other information collected at the federal level, push it down to the state and local. And we're going to see this in week 5. There is information, just like in 9/11, collected on the Boston Marathon and the Orlando shooters that was not pushed down to state and local level that might have made a difference. And I'll let you decide on whether it would have made a difference. So these are a menu list of options that you can choose from. And I can't emphasize this enough. Depth is so much more important. You can write a 1,500-word essay on the failures of imagery collection and how it led to the Iraq WMD failure. You can write something that narrow. You can, again, depth is much more important than a laundry list. So week 5, again, because it's a 7.5-week course, this course and all your courses, there's going to be no breaks. You're not going to have a week to write your paper or a week to do this. The course just keeps going and going and going. So you write and you can't fall behind. What I will allow you to do is I'll allow you to, if you can't to post your discussion sections on Sunday as well, if you need that extra time. So please, post your discussion section Saturday, Sunday. Respond to one or two of your classmates. I'll give a little bit of flexibility here, but please do not fall behind on this week, because this week's critical as well. So the counterterrorism case studies. We're going to look at Fort Hood, underwear bomber, Boston Marathon, European Union. The readings, the Zagart on the Fort Hood shooter and the Boston Marathon bombing, the congressional paper. And then the two documentaries about the Christmas Day bomber, the underwear bomber, and then the EU terrorism, PBS Frontline. And then the question to ask is, you studied 9/11 in the last week. This week, why do we still have these failures? Despite the billions, trillions, depending on how you count it, money, dollars spent to prevent these intel failures, why do they still have them? Why do they still happen? Why are they still occurring? So I look forward to this Thursday for groups 1, 2, and 3. And if there's questions or issues, please let me know.